So when I was at the Southern Parishes last weekend, I introduced to them that I'm starting a new homily series now that we've returned to ordinary time. So you might recall that I've done a couple homily series recently. We had one on Catholic social teaching last fall, and then I did one on discernment of spirits and prayer during Lent and Easter of 2020. And doing a series of homilies like this helps to be able to address larger topics of the faith that I wouldn't be able to cover in a single Mass, assuming you don't want me to keep going on forever. So this new series is going to kind of be an outgrowth of having taught senior theology at Pope John for the last 5 years. The class that I have been teaching is the interaction between faith and science, to try to help our students to be able to consider the different challenges to the faith today, which often are brought about in reference to science as justification for it. Questions like God's existence, the dependability of Scripture, how does things like the Big Bang or evolution fit in with our faith? And then the second semester, I look more at the kind of moral issues of our time today. Abortion, contraception, IVF, same-sex, gender ideology, all those kinds of things. And talk about why the Church's positions, even though we're in a highly scientific world today, why they remain reasonable and true. And so, having tried to prepare many of our young people there at the school to go off to college and to the world, I realized I hadn't really shared as much in the greater parish setting. So I won't be able to give you the entire year's worth of curriculum, so don't worry, it's not going to go that long. But I want to focus especially in the next coming weeks on certain Christian values and morals that we have. So last week, I reflected upon how we need encouragement facing a culture that's increasingly hostile to our Christian values. We need, in a sense, the courage that the martyrs had, to not be afraid to stand up for what is good and true as revealed by God. And so today, to continue this series and help us to be able to engage with some of these ideas in the world, I want to consider, in general, how does faith and science meant to work together? Because unfortunately, so often, they're portrayed as being in complete opposition to each other. For example, we're told we should follow the science, even if that means following the science that seems to be against things of our faith. Against perhaps thoughts like, science proves that God doesn't exist. Or this scientific study shows that this moral issue that we say is wrong is perfectly fine and normal. But in reality, from our Catholic point of view, faith and science are meant to work together well. And we can see this in our readings today. It makes clear that God is the one who's creator of the physical world, and he has power over it. So we see there Jesus even commanding the sea and the wind, and they obey him. So it's not surprising then that modern science actually developed out of the Christian worldview that understood the physical world to be ordered a very specific way by God. And so you can study it with a very consistent method. And so, for example, we see in other parts of the Scripture, the Book of Wisdom says that God arranged all things by measure and number and weight. And so the scientific method depends upon that belief that the world is ordered, and that if you do experiments the same way, you'll get the same answers. Therefore, the first scientists were Christians, and in fact, many of them were Catholic priests even. So if you go up and visit Ash Falls, you'll find a sign there that explains the principle of superposition, which has to do with sedimentary rock layers. And it says on the sign that this was discovered by the scientist Niels Stensen in the 1600s. But what the sign doesn't say there is that Blessed Father Niels Stensen is a Catholic priest and a declared blessed by the Church. So this scientific method of asking questions and doing research, forming hypothesis, testing that hypothesis through a number of experiments, coming to some conclusion, reporting it to others. This method is very successful in understanding the physical world. And science has brought about many advances, and so for human flourishing, so the Catholic Church certainly supports different scientific investigation. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense for me to be at Pope John teaching both theology and physics at the same time. So this method of science, though, has built-in limitations. It can't do everything. The method is set up very well to investigate the physical world around us. It looks for physical causes of physical things that happen. But it's limited in that way. It actually doesn't even look for spiritual things. And so science can't make conclusions about spiritual things. So if you give an example, if you think about it, you're on the beach and you're trying to search for metal coins underneath the sand. What are you going to use? Well, a metal detector, because that's what it's designed to do, to find metal things. But say you were going to pick up trash and wanted to find the plastic bottles that are buried under the sand. Well, the metal detector isn't going to help you there because it's not designed for that. It's not because it's a bad thing, but it's just not made for that. And so science is in the same way. That science is designed to look for physical things, but it's not designed to do anything about spiritual things. And so if someone uses the scientific method and they come to the conclusion, well, I didn't find any spiritual things, I didn't find God. Well, that's just like trying to use a metal detector to find plastic. You can't come to that conclusion. Not because science is bad, but it's limited to being very good in what it's designed for, finding physical things. It doesn't and can't find spiritual things. So we can't use science to try to answer theological and moral questions, just like we can't use the metal detector to find non-metal. But unfortunately, there are people that actually do that. They claim that science is the only legitimate way for us to know anything at all. That science can give us the truth about everything. That what we know is 100% certain. Science is settled. But that actually doesn't make any sense because science never claims to do that. Even certain principles that are well established, like Newton's laws of motion, actually had to be modified with further discoveries when it came to relativity and quantum mechanics. So having a scientific background myself, I get kind of nervous and skeptical when people try to use science to claim that they have knowledge of things that actually go beyond it. We're told sometimes just to trust the science, but that's not really how science works. Science is not a kind of blind trust, but it's to test theories based on observations and experiments. Because if you don't do that, science can very easily become scientism. It can be kind of a religious faith, almost. Kind of a worship of science or even scientists. Pope Benedict XVI, he said that man can place in science and technology so radical and unconditional a trust as to believe that science and technology can progress and explain everything completely and fulfill all of our spiritual needs. And that's why we need Christian faith. While science is really good at studying physical things, faith is the knowledge of God and spiritual things. Science is based upon human observation and experiments, but faith is based on trusting God for what he has said, for what he's revealed to us, because who he is, that he cannot deceive us nor be deceived. Faith also is not just a blind trust in what God says, because just like science, God tells us that we're responsible for using our reason to try to think through different questions when it comes to regard the faith. So, interestingly, that since science is based on limited human knowledge and faith is based upon God's knowledge, faith is actually more sure than science. But because our world is both physical and spiritual, we need them both science and faith. And religious faith can actually help purify science from going wrong. Faith can help make evaluations about morality that science alone cannot. Science could tell us that, according to biology, the moment of fertilization is the beginning of a human life. But it takes the addition of faith and morals to tell us we shouldn't kill that unborn life. A rejection of faith for just science alone actually ends up making that person become unscientific. So we'll have instances of people who would claim that, the unborn are just a clump of cells that only become human once it leaves the birthing person, and you can't really determine whether or not that happens to be a boy or girl until years later when they decide for themselves. Well, none of that has anything to do with following science. In fact, compared to those sophisticated intellectuals, I would say that the simple farmer and rancher knows a whole lot more about biology. John Paul II said that scientists, because they know more, they have to serve more. Since they have the freedom that's given to them for doing this kind of research, this specialized knowledge, they have the responsibility to use that knowledge wisely for the benefit of everyone. So you see, he's saying there's a difference between knowledge from science and wisdom. Wisdom is a further kind of knowledge. Scientific knowledge isn't the same thing as wisdom. To give a kind of humorous quote, knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing that you don't put the tomato in the fruit salad. So, considering this proper place and of science and its limitation, next weekend I'm going to look more at the foundational ideas of who we are as human beings, what we receive from our faith that helps to lift up what we receive from science. That we're created by God, men and women. Some fundamental ideas that are even brought into question today. Since we're not only physical creatures, but we also have spiritual souls, we need our faith to give a complete understanding of what life is, who we are. So the coming weekends, then, I'm going to apply a lot of these principles to some of the tough moral issues, the cultural things that are going on in our world today, so that you can be strengthened to be able to hold fast to our Catholic faith. So since I'm back and forth on North and South weekends, all my homilies are recorded. If you want to hear one of the topics and I happen to be on the other end, you can look that up on our website or on our Facebook pages. If God can command the wind and the sea, if he has control over all creation, then certainly he has control over the things that happen in our lives as well. This month of June is dedicated to the love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, who will give us the courage, the strength to be able to live out and defend the faith. And as I've sometimes pointed out before, the root of that word courage is cor, the Latin word that means heart. So if we need courage, we need strengthening, then we need a new heart. We need a heart. Have no fear, Jesus comes to give us his.